Hey guys, LevelCap here. Today we're going to be doing an unboxing and initial impressions of the Steam controller. This just came out and I've been highly anticipating this bit of hardware for quite some time, pre-ordered it forever ago, and now I finally have it. The contents of the box are pretty straightforward. You have your Bluetooth adapter there to connect with the controller wirelessly through your Steam box or your PC. Then you have a Bluetooth extender and of course some AA batteries plus the quick start guide manual. At first glance, the controller looks very similar to an Xbox controller until you realize it doesn't actually have those dual analog sticks. The underside has that Steam logo. It's fairly well-built plastic, and it's got kind of bumpers in all the locations you would expect them to be, so it's not a huge change up from the standard controller design, aside from the touchpads replacing the analog sticks. One nice feature that you find on a few custom controllers nowadays is the clickable finger grips there on the bottom side, so it just gives you 2 extra buttons compared to the standard Xbox or PlayStation controllers. This gives you 6 extra buttons instead of the 4 extra buttons you have on standard controllers that are accessible with fingers other than your thumb. Now, aside from the smooth touchpads, everything else seems fairly standard and typical from a controller. There's the battery slots on the bottom side that are kind of cleverly designed there, but it's not rechargeable, so that could be one thing that you might be disappointed by, considering both Xbox and PS4 have rechargeable controllers as a standard. Now, once I plugged it into the controller, Steam updated my firmware automatically once I was in big picture mode, and the first thing I wanted to do was, rather than play an actual Steam game, was try out Battlefield 4, because that's what I am most familiar with, and I wanted to see just what this controller could actually do in shooters, because that's going to be one of the bigger markets that I think people are interested in. Now, the controller is compatible with non-Steam games. The benefit of playing Steam games is that you can pick somebody's pre-made controller config, and that will usually help you get into a game that's not designed to use around this controller. However, with Battlefield, I was able to map the keys relatively quickly, and since the touchpad gives you a 1-to-1 mouse ratio, it basically just supplements itself for your mouse instead. The difference being that you have about a 1.5-inch diameter trackpad instead of a much larger mousepad. I mean, my mousepad alone is about 18 inches wide, so that gives me plenty of space to move and customize my sensitivity. I'm supposed to make up all that space on a 1.5-inch trackpad, and as you can see here, my accuracy is certainly suffering from it. The reason why analog sticks actually handle this pretty well is that if you just hold the analog stick to the left or right, you can basically move continuously in that direction until you release the analog stick. However, with the trackpad, you have to keep swiping, and it's like you have extremely low mouse sensitivity on a small mouse pad, and it forces you to do a lot of jerky swiping movements that do not look good. I had a really hard time being precise with this trackpad, even on lower sensitivity though. Now, to be fair, Battlefield was never designed to be used with this controller, so the fact that it actually adapts to the game and makes it somewhat playable is a testament, but you would never want to go online and play on PC with this controller instead of mouse and keyboard. It is simply just never going to be a supplement for competitive play. Now, to be fair to Valve, they never claimed that this was going to replace or be better than the mouse and keyboard, and the whole benefit or reason for having a controller is that you don't need a whole desktop to play. You can sit in your living room and play. The problem is that you're never going to want to really go up against somebody with a mouse and keyboard, so you have this weird paradigm where it's like, yeah, you can play in the living room now, but you're not going to want to because you're just going to get stomped by everybody that you go up against. But what if you're not playing a competitive shooter? What if you're playing one of the games that Valve has actually suggested playing with this controller, like Portal 2, which you can actually get in a bundle with this controller now? This is one of the few games that's technically supported by the Steam controller right now. I mean, the whole idea behind the controller is that you don't have to support the controller, it'll just work with any PC game. But this one has specifically got like buttons that have been already programmed in for how the controller should function, and it plays well for the most part. I mean, I had no problem navigating a lot of the basic Portal puzzles. I didn't actually get up to the more difficult ones to see if I could, shoot portals accurately while flying through the air, but I imagine I could do it with enough practice. And although my movements were a bit jerky, and you can kind of see it here in the gameplay here, there's this weird sort of like overly stutterly effect that happens sometimes. It was fine for Portal 2. I didn't really need to squeeze off headshots or anything like that in this game. You just kind of generally shoot portals onto certain surfaces and they appear there, and then you're good to go. All you have to do is maneuver your character, which is very easy to do with the Steam controller. It's just the precision mechanic that isn't as easy as I thought it might be, actually. I think part of the problem really comes from the fact that you are controlling a very precise crosshair with the pad of your thumb, and the pad of your thumb is a fairly large surface, so the controller has trouble pinpointing what the center point of your thumb is going to be, I guess, and on that point you have a really hard time zeroing in on pixel perfect accuracy. So general movements were pretty easy and very fast to learn, but the precise movements were more difficult, which is pretty much the exact opposite of what I thought the controller was going to be ultimately. It doesn't mean that it's a bad controller overall, it just means that you have to kind of design games around this in mind, and on consoles they added a lot of auto aim to their standard controllers, and frankly I would feel like you would need some of that with this controller as well, at least for first person shooters. Now I did run into a bug while I was playing Portal 2, and the controller basically just started spinning me around in circles every time I touched the trackpad, like this right here, and it made the game completely unplayable. I tried to fix it, I kind of went into the menu to recalibrate the controller. I basically just had to exit the game and restart it, at which point it fixed the issue, but it's something that happened to me and I assume it's probably happening to other people as well. Now, at one point I thought, if I'm going to play a game in the living room on my couch with the controller with a big screen TV and surround sound, what do I want to play? Well, Homeworld Remastered came to mind. I really like that game. It's a fun space sim, so I tried it out. And sure enough, somebody had made sort of a prototype controller layout on Steam. I plugged that in, and it was incredibly complicated and difficult. And I pretty much gave up trying to figure it out because I didn't want to sit there for hours trying to figure out how to play a game on controller that would be relatively simple on PC. Then I decided to try out the little indie game Besieged, because that always struck me as a game that would be fun to play kind of sitting back and just creating these ridiculous siege engines to sack these little villages and stuff. And for the most part, it was working all right on the Steam controller. I didn't have too many issues with building up creations, but a big part of building is deleting pieces that you've already placed, and I tried to map the delete key to a button on the controller because it wasn't already mapped, and I simply couldn't. It wasn't working in Steam for some reason. It said the button was mapped, and I went in game and hit the button, and it wouldn't delete pieces. And I've played this game before on PC, so I know how to delete stuff. I just don't know why it wasn't working on the controller. So I was running into a lot of issues just mapping keys on fairly simple games. And it became apparent to me pretty quickly that although this controller is designed around the idea of the community figuring out control schemes and trying to make games playable with their custom setups, that most of them just aren't going to be as enjoyable because they aren't designed around this specific controller. So in order for this controller to be fun to play with, I think developers are going to have to create their own specific control schemes for each of these games and maybe even tweak some of the basic engine mechanics to play out better with the controller. It just doesn't translate as well as I was hoping it would, and it's certainly not something that you're going to want to use in any sort of competitive manner. And something became apparent to me while I was trying to freaking play Counter-Strike against some bots and just having a horrible experience, is that you have to design games around this controller, and at the moment right now it's kind of like the microwave when it first came out. And stay with me for this analogy here, but when the microwave first came out, there was no microwavable food. There was no like frozen dinners or things you could just pop in the microwave, so people didn't really have much of a use for it because we already had ovens and toaster ovens and stuff like that. So people were already living their lives based around not having microwaves, and they didn't see the point in it. So just like this controller, there aren't a lot of reasons to use it right now, not until companies start designing games specifically around this controller, or we have an environment of gamers that are playing against each other with this controller only to keep things fair. You could also make an easy analogy to touchpad gaming on cell phones when they first came out. There wasn't really any good games designed for touchpad for a little while, so you could say it was not good gaming hardware, but clearly software has been designed around it and it's been a huge success. For the time being, I'm going to bench this controller and wait till people come out with really well designed and refined control schemes for some of my favorite games, and then maybe I can try out things like Homeworld in the living room, or strategy games in the living room, or things that aren't necessarily skill-based competitive games. So anyway, that's my first impressions with the controller. I'm hoping that better support with software comes for it in the near future, because at the moment there just aren't a lot of reasons to get one right now, unless you're absolutely in love with the idea of playing some of your PC titles on the couch and you want to spend a ton of time designing your own custom control scheme for them, and then not being able to control them quite as well as you could with mouse and keyboard. That's pretty much what the market is currently, but it could be a much larger market in the future, provided that the software backs it up. As always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is LevelCap, signing off.